On the fourth Friday of each month, from February to November, the museum puts on a talk. The videos are published on YouTube and it's free to subscribe. Click the bell to be notified when videos are available. Thank you for watching.
Welcome to all of you to another in our series of Friday talks. And this is going to be a wonderful occasion to hear all about the land that this man calls his own.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. I'd like to do firstly an acknowledgement to country. We acknowledge and respect the Wadawurrung people as the traditional owners of this land, paying respects to their elders past and present and their future leaders. Now, when I drove into the car park this morning, I saw the unmistakable figure of a man who obviously doesn't live on the Bellarine. He's wearing a Kubra hat, a short sleeve shirt, shorts and Blundstones. And I thought, he has to be our cameleer, and I was right. And here was I dressed, and I've even got a jacket in the car because it was a little chilly this morning. Anyway, today we are privileged to welcome Andrew Harper, one of Australia's most accomplished and respected desert explorers. Since 1995, Andrew has walked more than 30,000 kilometres across all 9 of Australia's major deserts. His explorations have taken him through some of the most remote landscapes on our continent, sometimes travelling solo and often leading commercial, camel-supported exhibitions that continue Australia's long and remarkable cameleering tradition. In 2007, Andrew founded Australian Desert Expeditions, an environmental charity that partners with leading universities and national research institutions. Together they conduct ecological and scientific surveys deep within Australia's inland deserts, places rarely visited and even more rarely studied. Andrew's work demonstrates the powerful connection between Australia's history of exploration and the needs of modern science. By travelling with traditionally outfitted pack camels, his expeditions move through fragile desert environments with minimal impact, allowing for close observation of flora, fauna, landscapes, and the cultural stories of people who've lived in these regions for thousands of years. His surveys not only advance ecological knowledge, but also keep alive the spirit, heritage, and discipline of historic desert explorations. And may I now ask you to give our customary welcome to Andrew Harper.
Thank you for the invitation to speak. I haven't been to Queenscliffe since I was this big. Sometime, I think, in the early 70s, and it doesn't look as though it's changed a hell of a lot, which is fantastic. I love it. It's great. So let's get right into it. I'm going to talk for about 50 minutes or so, and then afterwards feel free to save up any questions for at the end of the presentation. But I'll explain a lot about what each slide and video is about. So shouldn't be too many questions at the end, but we'll see how we go. So as Phil explained, I'll be talking tonight about what we do in the desert with our camels. And I'll give you a very broad look at how it all works for those of you who aren't familiar with the Australian desert and with the history of cameleering. We walk and work under the banner of Great Desert Walks, which is pretty descriptive, the 3 things, that's what we do. We have 2 companies that are under that umbrella. My own company, which is Outback Camel Company, camelexpeditions.com, which next year is celebrating 50 years. I haven't been doing it for 50 years. I've been doing it for 30 years. And I bought the company from the late Rex Ellis in 2000. And as Phil alluded, in 2007 we branched off into a scientific side, which is Australian Desert Expeditions or Great Desert Walks plus science, and as you'll see in a minute why we do that. But essentially it's all about the camels, it's all about walking country, and it's all about getting out there. So to set the scene about getting out there, I like to put this slide up because it makes a lot of sense about where we live on the ever-crowded planet, which, as you can see, in North America and Europe is complete humbug. And over here in South America, India, of course, the Himalayas there, Japan, all the lights are on. And in Australia, the only lights on are really down the coast, no one home in New Zealand, and Antarctica along the bottom. And this puts it into perspective about where we work and why we work there and what we work with. I'll give you a bit of time just to let that sink in. So we work obviously in the Australian deserts, of which that is most of the continent. And as you'll see in a minute, most of our work at the moment is in the Simpson Desert, which is not the biggest desert in Australia, it's one of the smaller ones. But that desert country corresponds to the biomes of the dry shrublands, right? Which is the great big chunk of the middle of the continent, of course, even including a tiny little part actually right up in the northwest of Victoria. All the mainland states have desert in them, South Australia the most in a percentage perspective. And I'd like to introduce you then to our professional colleagues, because without these guys we couldn't do what we do. I started working with camels in 1995 on my first trip across the Simpson Desert with the late Rex Ellis. And working with camels is fantastic. I've now worked with camels far longer than I've worked with horses. They're much easier to work with than with horses. They all have very distinct personalities. They all obviously have names, and they're all very, very different, just like all horses are different, just like dogs are different. Camels take to people really quickly. I'll explain about where these guys came from later on in the presentation. But camels have a many thousands of years history with humans, and they like hanging out with people, and we like hanging out with them. They're incredible animals, as you'll see. So they are very much part of our team. When we're doing things, they like to stick their head in and make sure that we're going the right way, and they are definitely part of the team. It's not a camel trek and the people, it's the trekkers and the cameliers and the scientists and the trek medics and the doctors, everyone working as a team. And as I mentioned, they all have distinct personalities. They're very much part of the environment and the landscape. They're very photogenic, and they like us. They like people. They like hanging out. They like that close contact. They respond to affection just like horses and dogs do as well. They consider myself and our team, my cameliers, all of us as part of the mob, which is really lovely. It's really lovely. And we have really deep connections with them as well, of course. And this is year in, year out, but mainly for that 5 months of the year, April, September, when we're working in the desert. So where did these camels come from? They were first introduced into Australia in 1840, but then primarily for the Burke and Wills expedition in 1860, which, as you would recall from school, even though it ended in tragedy, actually was a success. They did do what they set out to do. They did go from south to north, and it was all a bit of a stuff-up halfway back. But the big thing that came out of that expedition was the fact that camels were ideal for exploring the inland Australia. Everyone realised really quickly you had to have camels. So camels were imported into Australia from India right through up until the beginning of the First World War. About 15,000 or so were imported in. Once they had enough, then they could start breeding with them at places like Beltana in South Australia. And the big scientific camel expeditions, like the Calvert expedition in 1896 in Western Australia, all were decked out with camels. And of course, not only the camels, but the men, the cameliers, or Afghans, but even though they weren't actually from Afghanistan, came with them because the British aristocracy didn't have any idea how to work a camel. It was a completely total different thing from working horses. So they needed the expertise of how to work with and how to load the camels. And loading the camels is the best thing because one of the reasons why they knew they had to take camels to the inland was because you could take anything with you, like literally. You could take a boat, because back then they thought there was an inland sea, so you had to be prepared. And back then, that was the Toyota Land Cruiser of the day. Okay, so you see all these tradies driving around now in their Hiluxes and stuff like that. Back then, they would have had camels and all their gear on that. This is what you got around in. That was normal. You took your camels. And of course, they were used as the heavy haulage carrying, this is actually bags of chaff, so it's not bags of wheat, that would be too heavy, it's just chaff, but still an interesting way to load camels. Railway sleepers for building the railway line, and telegraph poles for the telegraph line. And one of the reasons they were used in that country, apart from the fact that they don't need to drink very often, is that walking on sand, camels don't have hard hoofs like horses or cattle or sheep. So the impact on the ground is spread across the surface of their pad, and they don't sink in the sand. You know, you might have seen like in Lawrence of Arabia going up the sand dunes because they can't sink. A horse will sink straight down. So scenes like this were really commonplace right throughout outback Australia up until pretty much the early 20s after World War I. Teams of up to 70 animals in one string, as we call them, and we call them a string because they're tied to each other with a piece of rope, so it's a string of camels. And in that photo, there's actually only 5 people, 5 cameleers, and it was not uncommon to have strings of up to 70 animals with 5 or 6 cameleers, always men, and that was the road train of the day. After World War I, motor cars, motor trucks, motor lorries, as they were called then, came into play. The camels, owned by the cameleers, were released into the wild and bred very well because there's plenty to eat out there, as you'll see shortly. So Australia now has the world's largest population of feral, dromedary or one-humped camels. Probably around 700,000-800,000-ish. It's not millions. Most of them, of course, in Western Australia because that has the most desert. And up until pretty recently, if I was doing the talk here in 1975 instead of 2025, most people would have thought, oh, well, the only camels in Australia are on the beach in Broome, and that's where you go to do a camel ride or anything with camels. But Rex Ellis started walking the deserts in 1976, and our camels are the only string of desert working pack camels left in the country. And as you'll see in a minute, it's a really important thing, heritage that we have. So we've been working in Western Australia over my 30 years in the Gibson Desert and the Great Victoria Desert, really big wide open country in the Sturt Stony Desert in South Australia. As you can see the camels going up the dune there, there's, really hard to do that with horses. The big salt lakes in WA and the Northern Territory and South Australia, we get around. At the moment, most of our work is in the Simpson Desert. We can walk across salt lakes. We have to be really careful because the camel fully loaded could be way over a tonne and they will sink through the crust. So we do have to watch out what we're doing. But we're very proud of our heritage. It does go back 165 years, it's a long time. Where we work is one of the last great wilderness areas in the world. And we forget that sometimes, living on the coast, but, we call it the outback, but actually it's a big wilderness area. What we use out there is traditional. Because it works. There's no point changing it. You might as well just, if it works, don't change it. So all our pack saddles and our gear and equipment is the same design as the Afghans use. Obviously now we use some modern materials like steel and different types of rope. But basically our pack saddles that we use, sitting on the ground here, the same as it would have been 120 years ago. And we have steel racks that we have on the side of each pack saddle like that, and you'll see how they're loaded in a minute. Everything's held together with rope, and the reason why is because you can fix it, you can cut the rope, you can burn the rope and put it back together again, you can change the shape of the saddle depending on the shape of the camel. The camels change shape from winter to summer, just like I do. And I have to let my belt out, so we have to let their saddle out. But balance is the whole thing about it. This is what's so important. So these camels here sitting in a nice row ready to be loaded with their pack saddle there full of straw and their carry racks on either side ready to put their load on each camel. And each camel has its own saddle and each camel has its own load. So that camel there, whose name is Morgan, was carrying 100 litres of water on each side. So he's carrying 200 litres of water, and that's 200 kilos. Not all the time. We'd probably cut that back to 160 after a few days. He weighed 900 kilos, so he's carrying a lot of weight for his frame, but for a camel, not a problem. Some camels don't carry all that weight, but the main thing is balance. You can see Jumper loaded up there. Lots and lots of stuff. She was one of our lead camels. All the others sitting or hushed in the background, ready to go. And once they're all loaded and ready to go, it's a great big collection of 5 or 6 or sometimes nearly 10 tonnes, depending on how many camels you have in a string, of walking stuff. It's quite amazing. As cameliers, we have to put that stuff on every morning and take it off every night, which is great. I know during the course of a day I end up lifting about 1.5 tons of gear, as we all do. That's work. But we don't consider it work. We're just, loading our camels. You can't treat them like Land Cruisers. They're very particular. They have their personalities. It's not just like throwing stuff in the back of the ute. All of that stuff there is being placed absolutely in the right position, as it has to be. And I've got a video to play here, because once we've loaded with stuff, it's time to go. Now, you might have seen there that I talk about a couple of things, scientific and walking with scientists and joining us on a trip. So I'm going to talk about the science side of things, and all of what I'm going to talk about here can involve any of you, any member of the public who comes along and joins a scientific survey as a paying trekker, right? So I won't focus on that so much today, but just bear that in mind, that these are open for people to join. The whole idea of us forming this business was to educate people, obviously go out there and explore things, but also for people to come out and experience with us. So, as you saw in that video, which I never get sick of watching, it's about Great Desert Walks plus science, and we call it walking with purpose. So what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean this. So some of you probably have driven in the Simpson Desert and lots of deserts in Australia, which is fantastic. The Simpson's about 173,000 square kilometres, and there's lots of four-wheel drive tracks, and a lot of people get out there from year to year and go up and down the tracks, which is great. The four-wheel drive tracks and the corresponding corridors in them where you're actually legally allowed to go correspond to about 0.000001 of 1% of the desert. Six zeros, did I say then? And the rest of it, the 99 point whatever, is for us with the camels. Because the reason why we do that is because when you're in a four-wheel drive and you look behind you, that's what you see. You see the road, okay? When we look behind us, this is what we see, right? That's our four-wheel drive. But more importantly, when we look down, which you can't do from a car, that's what you see, right? So you see the whole story of the desert. There it is. It's just written there. You can't avoid it. You have to see where you're putting your feet. And I have to see as a trek leader where I'm putting my feet and where the camels are going to put their feet, because and where the feed is and that sort of thing. So you don't miss anything. You have to look at the ground. And the story of the desert is on the ground. And because we're walking and we're quiet, camels are really quiet when they walk. They don't make a noise. If they do, it means they're trying to tell you something, there's something wrong. You know, the load's shifted, or there's good tucker over there or something. But the wildlife just treats us as part of the desert, which of course, because camels have been part of because they're wild now, they've been in the deserts for just on a century. And the other story we see, of course, is the story that's been there since before stories were recorded, thousands of years, the stories that the First Nations people have written on the desert sand, because in the Simpson Desert there's no rocky outcrops. You can't go and do any painting anywhere except right up in the north corner. But so the canvas is the ground, and using stone. So we work with, at the moment, Wankanaroo people on the eastern side of the desert. We're constantly looking at things and GPSing things, everything we discover about where they used to live in their country. And the other thing we see, of course, is the stuff that white fellas leave behind, and white fellas leave lots of stuff behind. From the explorers' days to prospectors to stockmen, and it was men then, it wasn't women. What they threw out as rubbish, now we pick up because it's interesting. Things they leave behind, things they lose. We take a metal detector with us on some trips because there's stuff to find, including bullet heads, and you wonder what the hell they were up to. But it's all part of the history of travelling in the desert and its cultural history, black and white, And of course, as someone pointed out to me the other day, now that the company's been doing it for 50 years and I've been doing it for 30 years, we've created our own story out there now. But ultimately, we do depend on vehicles to get to the desert. So even though it's about walking with camels and it's nice and quiet and it's peaceful and it's silent, our biggest cost is running that year in, year out, and that's not all of it, just to get to the desert and to take people in and out. So let's look at what we're doing with our Plus Science trips at the moment in the Simpson Desert. This was totally interrupted by COVID, I won't talk about that, but it hammered our business because we're a cross-border business, so we were literally stuck in South Australia and not allowed to go out and not allowed to go in. It was incredible, absolute nightmare for any business that had to go from across borders all the time. But anyway, we're still there. We're working in the Simpson Desert, which is the red part in the map. Many of you have no doubt been there, and there's some of you in the room who have trekked with us, which is lovely of you come along this morning. We've also worked recently in the Strzelecki Desert last year because of the floods. But basically, we're right in the middle of Australia. And the Simpson, why is it important to us? Because it's easy to get to, and it's got lots of different landscapes within landscapes. So Alice Springs is there, Birdsville down here, obviously Lake Eyre, Kadikatanda here. And that is basically the outline of the Simpson, and then the little green part of the Strzelecki. The main thing about the Simpson is all of it lies on top of the Lake Eyre Basin, the catchment area, part of the Great Artesian Basin. So again, Alice Springs here, Birdsville, and Lake Eyre is in here. And this is really important because the Simpson is technically the driest part of Australia if you look at it on a rain gauge side of things, but it's surrounded by arguably the world's largest last remaining wild river system, which is all of these blue lines, which normally are just blue lines and there's no water in any of it. No dams, no weirs, it's all unregulated. It can do what it likes. And of course, this year it did do what it likes and what it needs to do, because it has to keep flooding like that. It has to keep recharging the Great Artesian Basin and all the things that go with it. That was Birdsville back in in March. That's the Diamantina River, the third consecutive flood and the fourth one in 6 years, which creates havoc for us working in the driest part of Australia. But this year, what it did, not only was there a flood, there was record rain in Birdsville, 160 mils in 36 hours. At Popal Corner, which is where the three states meet, there was 340 mils in 36 to 48 hours, which has never ever been heard of before. So for us, when we finally got there in May, we had to postpone our science trips. We were walking in flowers the whole time, which for my professional colleagues is fantastic, because we don't carry food for our camels. They have to survive on what's out in the desert, which they do, they're camels. And, you know, it was just flowers. So they get all their food requirements out of the flowers, they get all their moisture requirements out of the flowers. When we arrived east of Birdsville in May, we gave the camels a drink because they'd been on the truck for 4.5 days. And they'd been eating hay, so they were a bit dry. They had a drink. So that was second week of May. Second week of September, when we left, we offered them another drink, of which 2 or 3 had a drink, maybe 5 litres. They didn't drink the whole time. Not once. Weren't interested. And they were weeing and pooing, you know, because they get all their moisture from what they're eating. And so when you hear, I read things where people say, oh, camels can go for 10 days without drinking. They can go for months and months and months and months, as long as they've got green tucker. And the other thing about the rain is, of course, it pushed all the water down Eyre Creek in the desert. So this is in the Simpson Desert, right? So this is about 60 k's west of Birdsville. On one of the waterholes there, which we call Min Min Waterhole, which we visited this year. Beautiful places. For our field ecologists, the flowers are fantastic. So even though we'd planned to do a lot of megafauna things this year, the floods prevented us from getting into the desert, so we immediately switched to botany, because if it wasn't flowering or growing in the desert this year, then it wasn't going to be there. So we worked, we had the botanical gardens in Melbourne. 2 botanists came out with us who just couldn't believe it. They'd never been there before. They were overwhelmed. They would do this 10 by 10 grid under certain acacias. And I remember, it's Nina at the front there, said there was something like 50 species of plant in there. They just didn't have enough hands to do it all. We worked with the herbarium from South Australia. Again, it was the first time Michael had been out with us. He thought, this is fantastic. And we've discovered some things this year that were really unusual for us. Because there was so much water, there'd been so much rain, the clay pans still had water in it, as you could see on that slide. And one of the things that live in the clay pans are these little shield shrimps. And they're only about that big from head to tail. they look prehistoric, and they basically are. They've been around for a long, long time. And their eggs will stay in a dry clay pan, it's been noted, for up to 30 years. And then it rains, and they hatch, and 6-7 weeks later they're dead. No one really knows what the benefit of a shield shrimp is. I've never seen a bird eat them, but if you turn them up the other side, they're nice and red and juicy. But one of the really interesting things we found...
Oh, I've never seen this before. It must just be in some of the corridors where the water just suits these minute little mussels. And look, I'm going to have to go back and find out just how they survive the bus times and come alive and end up like this in a boom as we are in the present.
So this is Boyd Wykes, one of our ecologists. Now what he's looking at there are these tiny they look like mussels, okay? So that's in the palm of his hand. So that's at their full size, that's what they grow at. Now I've walked around there in the Simpson for 30 years. I'd never seen these before, and this isn't in a floodplain, this is just out in the corridors. And I thought, what the hell is this? Most of them were empty. And then we discovered one patch where they had the shrimp, they're clam shrimps. And now these are growing out in the desert. They're native to Australia. You do apparently see them up near Alice Springs. I'd never seen them in the desert, never seen them in a dry corridor before. Really interesting find because of the wet conditions. How on earth they get there, I have no idea. But that was the good side of the wet years and the floods, even though it interrupted our scientific program. It comes up, you find these other little things that you weren't expecting. It was fantastic. So to go back to the Simpson and the other side of things that we look at apart from the science and the flora and the fauna, if you look at a normal map of the Simpson, what I call a white fella map of the Simpson, we like putting lines everywhere, state borders and everything. We put lines around everything. We love doing that. Most of the Simpson in South Australia and Queensland is national park. Northern Territory, no, because they have a different set of rules up there, being a territory and not a state. But if you look at that map, and then you look at this map, this is the blackfella map of exactly the same area, right? With the state borders on it, Northern Territory, Queensland and South Australia, Birdsville and Alice Springs. And it's exactly the same as what we saw on the previous slide. But this is how we look at the map when we're walking with the camels. So where we were working this year is in this area west of Birdsville. Now this is, very briefly, Two Boys Dreaming map of two boys who turned into kingfishers and walked from the western side of the desert, following a lot of native wells, which I'll tell you about in a minute, all the way to the Diamantina River at Birdsville. You can see the fish there. And along the way, like any storyline, it's all the types of animals, emus, kangaroos, little hopping mice and geckos, ants, all the things they'll see on the way as they walk through their country. That's how Wankanaru people, who we work with, view the landscape. And now, because we're walking the country with our camels, that's how certainly I view the landscape, now that I've had 30 years of being able to do it. So this is, when we look at maps, this is how we look at them now. However, to look at the whitefella history, David Lindsay, the explorer, 1886, and Dennis Bartel in 1986, followed a series of native wells. Now, I'll show you a picture of one in a minute. These are areas in the Simpson, these dots here. There's Birdsville, is about there, okay. And this is where people got water. They usually had to dig a tunnel down to groundwater. It mightn't have tasted so good, but it kept you alive. And that's what allowed people to trade right across the desert and to walk from one side to the other. They're not sacred sites, they're watering holes, but it's where people lived.
It's a very special way to travel with a string of camels. You move through the landscape in a more human way. You approach places in the way people would have approached them in the past on foot. You notice when you haven't seen birds for a while. You notice when you start to see the first few stone artifacts. You notice when you start to see more stone artifacts and you know you're near a stone quarry or something. You notice things because they're under your feet. It's the human story of Australia's deserts. 5 million square kilometres, 50,000 years of human history, one of the longest autonomous hunter-gatherer traditions in the world, but not a static tradition. And there's the great adventure.
It's our colleague, the late Dr. Mike Smith, talking about native wells, of which this is one. It looks like a collection of trees. But what it is, when you get closer, you can see people were living there. This is bone fragments from all the millions, literally, of animals that have been eaten there over centuries, over thousands of years. You eat, a little desert rat kangaroo, you toss it out. And that's the giveaway of these sites. So we go out to these places with archaeologists and anthropologists and trekkers, such as yourself, who join the team, and we look at all these things. We note them down, we photograph them, we GPS where they are, and sometimes Wanganuru people ask us to bring things back for safekeeping in what they call the Keeping Place Museum in Birdsville. We pick up whitefella things too, and also, of course, the cross-cultural things where before Wanganuru people left the desert in the early 1900s, they were wearing clothes, of course. This is my friend Don Rowlands, Wanganuru elder from Birdsville, pointing out some things on one of these mickery sites where we were, including grindstones. This stone has been, carried about 70, 80 kilometres. It's now been used so much it's broken in half, and they're left in certain places like a kitchen. So you'd have a kitchen at that mickery and a kitchen at that good site. You didn't cart your stuff around all over the place. That is the remains of a shield that I found back in 2017, which is extraordinary because there's lots of termites in the Simpsons, so anything wooden doesn't last. But mainly, of course, what we see is stone implements, axe heads like that. That stone comes from up near Cloncurry, between Cloncurry and Mount Isa. And Don comes out with us on some trips, not always to walk, but usually just to advise. If we come across something really interesting, he'll come out and supervise it, like in this case, covering a grave site, because not only did people live there, they also died there, of course. And when I say back then, 1900, if you were 50, you were old, because you didn't live a long time. You lived out there. You didn't get to 85 or something. You were old if you got to 50. These are some of the organisations we work with, not every year, but depending on where we are and what we're doing, okay? So they come and go. We don't pay them, they don't pay us. They get to look at the research area that's way bigger than anything they've seen before, and we get to use their data and to help us put our reports together. Back to the Simpson again, the other things that we look at, animals, of course. So we've been looking, really interested in the mammals and marsupials that are out there, particularly any things like cowrie that are on the stony areas, but mainly the things that are on the sandhills, like the spinifex hopping mouse and mulgaras. House mouse are out there too. Tiny little animals that are all nocturnal that we set traps for, pitfall traps, to look for their density. We are looking for the desert rat kangaroo. Hasn't been seen since 1933. Doesn't mean it's not out there. No one else is out there walking around looking for stuff, only us. So we've got a pretty good chance of finding it. It's a mulgara down on the bottom and a spinifex hopping mouse up the top. So we would weigh these animals and then put them back in their habitat once we've caught them. The pitfall trap there down the bottom. Sometimes we use Elliott traps and sometimes camera traps just to record things, particularly for dingoes and cats. Unfortunately, there are cats everywhere, right across Australia, right across the desert. Every day, every other day, you will see a cat track. That's just the way it is, unfortunately. Cats do the most damage of anything in the desert, apart from humans. So, camels and foxes dingoes belong there, but foxes and rabbits compared to cats hardly registers now. Luckily, I've hardly seen any rabbits in the desert since 1995 and the Khaleesi virus. Every trip we do, every survey we do is a bird watching trip because that's by default. Birds just consider us as part of the landscape. This year there was heaps of budgies. It was fantastic. It was really wonderful because of the rain and there was so much feed. We did a dedicated birdo trip on one of the floodplains, 77 species in 14 days. Of which most of them, 51 or 2 of them are the usual suspects. The others come in with the floods. Coming towards the end of the presentation, but how did all this start? Why did we go from just camel trekking, walking with camels and having a great time, to actually walking with purpose and actually trying to do something besides have a great time? So I'd been walking around for 12 years with camels, and I thought, well, this is good. And then I thought, well, it could be better because we're going to places that white fellas don't go to, that not even native people go to anymore, First Nations people, because they drive around in Toyotas. So we're going to places where people don't walk anymore. It's that simple. So if you're going to do that, you might as well take the experts with you who can look at the landscape and tell you what the bloody hell you're looking at. So what I decided to do in 2007 was to, myself and 3 other colleagues formed Australian Desert Expeditions, and our first trip was on the Callacoopa Creek, which is just above the Warburton here, above Lake Eyre, right? So Birdsville's there, and there's Alice Springs. Now the Callacoopa Creek is usually dry. It's a salt creek, and it can be a bit boggy with local rain sometimes. That's the sort of landscape it is. The classic sort of open desert, hardly any trees at all. All those little black dots are acacias. But, this is getting very close to Lake Eyre, so that's that very salty landscape. But it's known for megafauna. So these are the animals that lived up to about 50,000 years ago, right across Australia, but particularly in what was then a big, lush savanna, heaps of tucker, water, fresh water. That's where the inland sea was, the inland ocean, the inland lake that was Lake Eyre. And these animals lived quite happily there. They eventually ran out of food and it all died off, and now they're just megafauna fossils. And they've been discovered since about the 1870s, when the first air went there, and the explorers went there, and they wondered what these things were. And Yasmin and I visited Flinders a couple of weeks ago and had a look at Bruce, as we call him. And we've been trying to go back there to get more of Bruce, because how do we know that there's not other Bruces that died in the same spot? Maybe they fell into some mud, or who knows. So we want to go back there. So next year it's on the itinerary to go and look for more of this fella. And the really interesting thing is that they're suspecting, which is amazing, that perhaps they have an unheard of for diprotodon. Because I asked Aaron, I said, how do they sleep? And they said, well, we don't know how they slept, because they're big, heavy animals. How did they sleep? And they suspect, through one of the bones that we found, that perhaps they can lock, like horses do, their fetlock. And horses can sleep standing up, as you know. Camels can do it too a bit, but they can't lock their feet. Horses can. But on one of the fossils, there was this niche where it clicks into place. And they're really excited about that, because that would be a total game changer about, how these animals used to work. So that's one of the reasons why we're going back. And the land wants to tell you what's going on. It wants to reconnect with that walking knowledge. What's it trying to tell us? For its sake and for the entire country's sake. Unless you go and look, you don't know. We're the last camel train walking in the desert, and we're the only one walking for scientific purposes. Camels allow us to get to these remote places and have a really minimal environmental impact. The Australian desert represents a huge percentage of the Australian continent in area. So about 45% of the Australian continent is estimated not to be surveyed by scientists and ecologists, and out of that 45%, a large part of it is represented by the 9 major deserts. So it is important to actually find out what's going on out here, what's living here, what used to live here, what is living here now that may be impacted by climate change and by fire, by the impact of man and invasive species. And unless you know what's going on in the country, then you can't manage it. And the only way to know for this part of the continent is to actually get out here on foot and have a really good look. On every survey that we do, we're going to come across Aboriginal artefacts. We can help find things and discover things, contributing to their knowledge of the land, that link that was broken 110 years ago.
Australian desert expeditions walk the country we used to walk around, so it's really important to keep those places connected. And if you haven't been there for a long time, it spreads out in your mind and you just can't see how it connects again. Camel train has opened up this country, basically. This is part of the history that we've got to hang on to. They are the ships of the desert.
We love the fact that we're able to keep that Cameliers heritage going, and consequently the national institutions, the scientific institutions and the museums and the universities and the state environmental departments can see also that, hey, this is a really good way to get out into country. It would be a sad day, I think, for Australia if we couldn't do what we're doing now.
It really is important for me to see the camel team out here and having a look around and finding out for yourself why this place is so special. The whole country is a story. How we walk the country, how we survive, how we live. People in the future will know this country with the information we leave behind.
And this is the other reason. It's got nothing to do with science or with camels even, but it's about where everyone lives. Now most, 80% of the people in Australia live on that blue line between Adelaide down to Melbourne, past Queenscliffe, up to Sydney and Brisbane and the Gold Coast. There's a few that live over there in Western Australia apparently. And I live in the yellow bit, and some of us in this room live in the yellow bit. There's not many of us, and it's quite unusual for any country to have that population imbalance. So one of the reasons we go out there on slow travel is just because we can, and because we need to, and because we believe that everyone should do. Go out there and just get away from all the humbug. And of course, what they're getting away from, what they're meeting is the animals. And it's very hard to describe to people how much impact these guys can have on you when they are it. They are carrying every single thing you need: food, water, communications, medical equipment, swags, all the stuff. And their impact on us as a team of Cameliers is really, really strong, but also on the trekkers who decide to come along with us. It's not just, oh, there are the camels, you know. The camels do become the day because, you know, we're working and walking beside them. As Cameliers, we have a very strong bond with our camels. You know, they're our mates, basically, you know, and it's wonderful. And of course the landscape itself, you know, it's great to just, for a photographer, the light, you know, these aren't staged photos. This was just what it does, and from sunsets to rainbows, you know, it's fantastic. But as a photographer, you can have a lot of fun out there too. Camels are very photogenic, as I said, and you can be a silly bugger sometimes and have fun and games. But, you know, we have dedicated photo trips sometimes as well, and especially for the stars, looking at the Milky Way. But the main thing is just to get out there around the fire and enjoy, you know, everyone's company. There's no electric lights, there's no generators, you know, we don't have mobile phone coverage. Really, when it comes down to it, it's just getting out there, especially under a full moon, is wonderful, very special for camels and humans. And the ladies from the Western Desert in Western Australia had this saying, and I think that applies to everyone who's been out there with us, whether they're looking at science or just coming out for a good old walk. There's something about it. And then, of course, you get to that part. Question up the front.
Where do you start your journey from, and where do you keep your camels?
Okay, where do I start the journey from? It changes every year. Next year we start from Alice Springs, so our trips start in Alice, and then it's a 5-hour drive down to the western side of the desert. We're on the western side of the Simpson, then we go all the way across on that big 30-day trip. Then we're working out of Birdsville, and people fly to Birdsville from Brisbane. My camels are up at Deniliquin, where I live, between Deniliquin and Moolameen, on a friend's property. They're in a paddock up there. It's not a big paddock, 2,000 acres of saltbush. And so they're being camels from September to April, getting fat and just eating. We truck them up in April to the Northern Territory.
Yeah, do you ever take camels from the wild to train them as pack animals?
Yeah, so the question was basically, are my camels wild camels? All of them are wild camels. So all of the camels were caught, most of them in the top of South Australia by a friend of mine, and he sources them from the same areas. And I've had camels that he's caught 20 years ago who I know are related to ones he caught a month ago, because they're brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts. You know, they're all coming from the same area. So all of these camels were once feral camels, and you might think, well, how does that work? But like I sort of said there, it's amazing. You can get a camel that's been brought up in the wild for 7, 8, 9 years, and then they come into the humans, and you know, they've been bred basically by humans for thousands of years. So it just, they switch on. Oh, humans. Oh yeah, I've heard about them. Yeah, it's really interesting. It happens really quickly. Really quickly.
What's the lifespan?
Sorry?
The lifespan of a camel that can work in the...
Oh, the lifespan of a camel? Well, for these ones, they'll work well into their 30s. In the wild, they'd be, you know, because they have to walk further for food and stuff, it's totally different. But my camels work for a good 15 years at least, yeah.
If you had a medical emergency or something, you have a speed camel to take someone, or...
We've got a shovel. We have a doctor on every trip, and we're affiliated with the RFDS in South Australia or Queensland, and we have an evac procedure, which is either light plane, helicopter and or vehicle. Yep.
Do you ever have trouble with wild camels coming in?
Sometimes in the dead of winter, the wild bulls, they can be troublesome. Yep, we have to shoo them off. You know, when I say shoo them off with a stock whip normally.
So what a camel is comfortable and capable of carrying. You just get a feel.
Yeah, it's just experience, you know, and you it's like putting, and also where you put the weight in your backpack, you know, you when you're hiking, you put it, you know, evenly and some at the top and some at the bottom and on your hips. It's the same with the camel, but you have to be careful. But it's just experience. It's just, you know, knowing what's right for that camel. They will tell you if it's too heavy or if they're uncomfortable. Yeah, definitely, because it's really hard work for them. So a young camel that's never done that before, you wouldn't put a heavy, like you wouldn't put a heavy backpack on you and go up, you know, Mount Everest like that. You've got to start off slowly. Yeah.
Physiologically, what makes a camel different to any other animal in regards to sleep?
Cripes. Briefly, their blood, the thickness of their blood can change. Like, when my camels need to drink, like say it's been really dry and they've offered a drink at the end of each trip, I've seen them put away 70 to 80 litres, right? So I'm about 94 or 5 kilos now. So that's that much volume and weight of water that goes straight in, like boom, non-stop. And they'll stand, so I'm aware of any other animal that can do that. If we tried to do the same amount of water input, it would kill us. They can do it, and they'll stand there really quietly after that, and you can hear the water just wobble. You can hear it, and you can almost see them hydrate. It's really bizarre because their blood can handle it. So that's the main thing. And then, you know, when it's dry, they draw on their reserves of fat, which is in their hump. They have, you know, they can more or less close their ears because they're so fluffy. They've got triple eyelids to keep the sand out. Lots of things, you know, lots of things. They'll sit into the sun to keep their body cool, depending on how hot it is, how hard they're working, what they're eating. Yeah, so it depends on lots of things, yeah.
What's the potential of a feral camel to become a major problem?
Not much, because the season will take care of that. You know, if it's dry, they'll die out. When it has been on the news, it's because it's been really dry and they've come into mainly communities and looking for water, and, you know, trashing air conditioners and you know, water pumps and stuff like that, or on cattle stations. But yeah, really. But like I said, I like camels, but and it'd be good if they weren't there, but it'd be much better if cats weren't there, and rabbits and foxes and donkeys and pigs and goats, and yeah.
Have you ever worked with two-humped camels?
Two-humped camels, Bactrian camels, no, never seen one. So they're not in Australia. So no, only in Mongolia and China. No, it's too hot here for them.
And I'd like you all, if you would, to show Andrew our great appreciation.
Thank you.